Caliban's War follows approximately 1 year after the event of the previously discussed Leviathan's Wake. It's seen a significant change to the solar system. The OPA has used its leverage to be officially recognized as a government for the Belt and outer planets. Tension between Mars and Earth has increased, and the proto-molecule is doing strange things on the surface of Venus. But the story's prologue begins in perhaps the least likely place, with a 4-year-old girl who just wants to finger paint at school. But still, people she is familiar with, including her doctor, abduct her with the lure that they're bringing her to the mother that had abandoned her. As with Leviathan Wakes, with Julie Mao, Caliban's War will also feature the search for the missing daughter, and likewise is involved in system-wide events that are going to shape humanity's future. The first novel had flipped between the perspectives of two characters, James Holden and Detective Miller. Caliban's War will be the first to change that, as for the next several books, there will instead be 4 perspectives, and it certainly provides a broader picture. There's Bobby Draper, a Martian Marine, Christian Avasarala, a high-ranking UN official on Earth, Praxitide Meng, father of the missing girl May, and living on the Jovian moon of Ganymede, and the returning James Holden, still employed by Fred Johnson and the OPA. This allows a larger view of the events, which previously were limited to direct observation only in the Belt, and to a greater variety of perspectives, values, and personal journeys. It's also a hurdle for me, so please bear with me. I've done my best, but the proper pronunciations of these names don't even agree in the same fiction, so I'll do what I can. The first book mentioned that the moons of Ganymede and Europa were settled with the specific intent of growing food for the outer planets, making use of large orbital mirrors to redirect light for greenhouses. Of the two, Ganymede was the most important, and it's understandable why. Not only is it the largest moon of the solar system, our moon, despite its huge size compared to Earth, is actually only the 5th, but it's also the only moon in the solar system with a magnetosphere, which deflects ionizing radiation, thus making it safe for the growth of plants and human beings. Pregnant women will go to Ganymede to increase the chances that their infants will survive birth. It's not an exaggeration to say that Ganymede is the most important settlement in the outer planets, and so there's no surprise that all 3 sides want it. In the wake of the war in the first novel, there is tension between Earth and Mars, as I mentioned, and a mistrust of the OPA, given that it's a collection of factions, some far more extremist than the more reasonable ones in control. At the bargaining table, no one is willing to give up Ganymede, not to the OPA, and certainly not to the other side. So both Earth and Mars have a presence on the moon, regularly patrolled by troops on both sides and by ships in orbit. Having both sides in such proximity is a boon for anyone that wants to ignite another war. And given that this is called Caliban's War, well, that should be pretty obvious. In the prologue, May has made her mother a space monster out of finger paint, and in a cruel move, one of the women responsible for her abduction introduces her to a real-life monster. This monster, this new species, is what will start this war, attacking the Earth forces on patrol on Ganymede. This is determined after the fact, however, because the events are witnessed by the lone survivor of that battle, a Martian Marine by the name of Roberta Bobby Draper. Bobby's genetic background combined with the lower gravity of Mars has left her a giant even among her own people. In fact, she's such a large human being that she needs customized power armor for her role as gunnery sergeant. Not that it makes a difference. While on patrol, her platoon spots an incoming group of UN Marines, apparently charging them for attack. Her platoon, which includes the 4-person squad that Bobby leads, quickly prepares for an attack, even sending out Yojimbo, a 9-ton combat mech. Yojimbo is the Japanese word for bodyguard, and it's no doubt that it's there to serve a similar function. It is effectively a walking tank, with a lone pilot on board. Considering how intensely Martian Marines are trained, they even practice in 1G environments, just in case they ever need to conduct a ground war on Earth. Going against an entire platoon complete with backup mech is suicide, which is precisely why Bobby doesn't think that this is what it appears to be. Not that it's easy to communicate, because they're being jammed. But in the end, everyone realizes the truth. The Earth Marines are not the threat, but rather the thing chasing them is. The Earthers were hoping that, with the help of the Martians, they could kill the monster. Never has anyone been more wrong. The thing destroys the entire platoon, Yojimbo included, using nothing but physical strength. It can tear fully armored soldiers in half. It can pick up soldiers and throw them at other soldiers with enough force to kill both on impact. Armor be damned. The mech is torn to pieces, as is its pilot. Bobby herself only survives because the creature self-destructs. The situation is even worse than it sounds, because with the jamming that the monster is somehow causing, it doesn't have any kind of environmental suit, nor is it carrying any tech, so it's something in its very nature that jams signals. Well, no one knows what's going on now, only that there is a shooting war occurring on the ground, and the others join in. A 2-day battle follows, resulting in 3,000 dead, including many civilians, and during the battle, one of the orbital mirrors falls and rains debris everywhere. Bobby is recovered, and it's hoped by the Martians that between her suit and her eyewitness testimony, everyone can be convinced that the threat is not each other. But for Bobby, it means struggling with PTSD, the natural consequence of the hell that she went through, leaving her ritualistically cleaning and re-cleaning her gun, as if she could cleanse the horror from her mind if she just cleaned it thoroughly enough. Avasarala on Earth is naturally very concerned about the disaster shaping up on the most important outpost in the outer planets, and it's not helped by the military briefing, which shows Admiral Nguyen champing at the bit to have a show of force. It takes a lot of political wrangling to instead suggest a peace summit on Earth to stop things before they go too far. Because what worries her greatly is that this is distracting everyone from the true threat. The protomolecule is alive and well on Venus, stretching filaments all across the planet, doing strange things with local elements, and even managing to somehow increase the gravity of the planet by 3%. Just what is it capable of doing to all of them is a total unknown. As she puts it, regarding the monster, either Mars made it, and they can deal with that, a third party made it, which makes it more difficult to handle, but it can still be dealt with, or finally, Venus made it, and suddenly all bets are off. Avasarala puts it as so. I have a binder with 900 pages of analysis and contingency plans for conflict with Mars, including 14 different scenarios about what we do if they develop an unexpected new technology. The binder for what we do if something comes up from Venus is 3 pages long, and it begins Step 1, Find God. On the moon that is the center of so much attention is Prax, a botanist and the father of May. His wife divorced and left the moon some time ago, leaving him alone to search for his daughter. First in the midst of war, and then in the midst of collapse as everything on Ganymede, environmental and social structures, begins breaking down. He knows someone took her, claiming to be his ex-wife, and that it couldn't actually have been, so he is left with a parent's worst nightmare, to have one's child be lost and be beyond reach. Prax's concerns overwhelm him to the point where he is barely functional. He doesn't eat unless there's someone there to remind him. He needs to keep lists to recall the most basic points, and he's emotionally unstable, even attacking a fellow parent as an expression of his own growing fear that she is dead. He asks to examine the corpses to see if he can find her, makes deals with the black market, even tries to make inquiries about child prostitution on the off chance that someone wanted to procure her for that sick purpose. The black market hacker is able to find Dr. Strickland taking May in return for some vegetables. But to find out where he took her, the hacker demands chicken, something impossible to find in the collapsing Ganymede society. Prax reports to security his discovery that all 16 children who have the same immunodeficient disease disappeared. And before the attack happened, no less, an infinitely small coincidence. But security is so overwhelmed with all the missing people, plus the breakdown of basic law and order. The woman behind Prax in line reports that her brother's murder happened right in their home. Prax's concerns are thus brushed aside. As a botanist, Prax refers to the problem with Ganymede's environment as the Cascade, When one thing goes wrong, it can cause the whole system to collapse because of its interdependency. For example, off the coast of Alaska, the seal and sea lion populations dropped, possibly as a result of overfishing eliminating their primary food source. So as a consequence, killer whales, who prey upon those marine mammals as their primary food source in the area, were forced to turn to sea otters as an alternate food source. But because sea otters are much smaller, the whales were consuming them in larger numbers to try to get the same nutritional benefit. With their numbers dwindling, there were fewer sea otters to consume urchins, so the population of urchins exploded. Urchins eat kelp, and so they were in turn consuming massive quantities of the kelp beds, which in turn led to smaller fish, as well as those species that protect their young in the beds, to be exposed to greater and greater predation themselves. The whole system is collapsing because it's all interconnected, and taking one piece out can mean there's no way to keep the rest of it from falling apart. Prax points out that this is especially problematic in artificial systems. In the end, something will happen to restore some form of balance off the coast of Alaska due to sheer variety of species both within or capable of exploiting the now available ecological niche. With nothing like that on Ganymede, the whole thing will simply fall apart. This happens not just with artificial ecosystems, but anything made without the robust collection of fail-safes and alternatives that many artificial systems have. For instance, on November 9th, 1965, at 5:16 p.m. Eastern Time, a device on a power line did what it was built to do. It cut power to the line because there was too much going through it to be safe. So the load was dumped onto the next line, which overloaded that one. So it went on to the next line. And you see where this is going. In the end, 80,000 square miles and 30 million people lost power for 13 hours. And that was with things working the way they were supposed to. Imagine what would happen if the system broke down completely. The Cascade is larger than that, though. It describes the breakdown taking place within an entire society. The system simply isn't strong enough to survive the impact of a multi-day shooting war with extensive collateral damage. Consider what happened to Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria, and that was even with major relief efforts from both the nation and from international foundations. Factor in that Ganymede belongs to no one power, that every military ship in the area is on edge and ready to shoot someone, and that going to Ganymede isn't a few hours' trip, and you can see why this is going to cascade completely out of control. Responding to this from the OPA is Holden. We first meet him and his crew of the Rocinante taking down pirates preying on OPA ships, but in response to the Ganymede disaster, they're sent to investigate on the OPA's behalf. Holden, Amos, and Naomi head in on an old OPA ship, the Weeping Somnambulist, an apt description of poor Prax. Holden tries and fails to sneak around with a beard to disguise himself, but he is spotted both by the UN people and by Prax himself, recognizing him from the broadcasts in the first book. Avasarala wants him watched for now, and then picked up when he has plans to leave to find out what they have learned. Holden's got an arrest-on-sight order on him. But Prax sees him and checks his list to remind himself of the final point on it: get help. He's hopeful that, perhaps, this self-appointed do-gooder might help find his sick little girl, unaware of just how close she got to this monster, this strange new species that could annihilate 2 military platoons and indirectly lead to the fall of Ganymede. Unaware also of how she is connected to that species. Funny thing about the word species, it actually comes from Latin, and it means a type or a kind. It's still used in English that way in business, in specie. It means to provide an asset in its current form as opposed to liquidating it. But yeah, if you add the al suffix in Latin to words, it means pertaining to or having the form of. And so, specie did enter the English language in a different way with that suffix. The word special.